Even though I left the official Federal Park and Forest Service years ago to go out on my own, most of the work I get still involves national land and wildlife. That stands to reason. I'm an expert, you might say, in the field. But every once in a while I get a real ringer tossed my way. I don't mind. The change of pace keeps my interest up, my senses sharp. And when folks are stumped, eventually they come to me, Wiley Jessup. Why, this one time... Oh, no. Better stick to this one tale I was fixing to tell. The old proverb says that a man who chases 2 rabbits catches none. By the way, I resigned from official duty mostly because it got so dad-blamed official. Everything was official, from the cars to the paperwork to the doggone officials. It was all too official for me. I wrote up so much paper on that job, I wound up wondering how there could be any trees left. I know I personally deforested Mexico. This one ranger, Ernie Sanderson, he loved to do paper. He looked forward to it. He'd come in every day, whistling away, sit down at his desk, and announce that he was going to catch up on some paper. One day he asked me what I was having for lunch, and I said, catch up on some paper. He didn't get it. I didn't expect he would. Plus there was that goofy hat they made you wear. And people, the tourists, the campers, the vacationers, they didn't come out for the trees, mountains, rivers, lakes, and sky. Hell no. They wanted electrical hookup, ice, beer, live bands, flush toilets, and swimming pools with slides and heated water with chlorine. When they told me I'd be cleaning pools and wearing a whistle, that's when old Wiley said he'd had enough. Last thing I did, I took off that whistle and I took off that hat and I officially resigned, in writing, on paper, in duplicate, made a copy just for Ernie Sanderson, a parting gift. Now I'm unofficial, a private ranger. They call me in when all else fails, which it does a lot more frequently than you might think. I tell them I'll protect the land, the forest and the flowers, the flora and fauna, but I won't do windows, dumpsters, or pools. Being unofficial doesn't bother me none. What counts can't be measured by the bars on your arm or the egg on your cap. And the upside is that I don't do any paper at all. Not long ago, a few buddies of mine were having a little moonlight soiree over a campfire to which I was kindly invited. I never miss a chance to blow smoke across the coals with these boys, a good group. We tell stories, tall stories, each one taller than the last, so by the end of the night we're telling stories on the order of the California redwoods, stories with lift and substance and majesty. And this is the natural way that Paul Bunyan come to be with his Blue Ox Babe, and Rip Van Winkle, Johnny Appleseed, and Pecos Bill, all of those boys. All it takes is a clear, cold night, a good-sized campfire, some logs or setting stones, a little hidey-ho in a jug, and a band of the most excellent and highly polished practitioners of the ancient art of truth-stretching that you can find. We had all of those ingredients, and our stories were building up nicely, reaching truly monumental proportions. But I could see that one of the group, Cap Robinson, was holding back. He was a mite withdrawn. Something was eating at him. We could tell because he was quiet as a circle and hawk, and old Cap will usually toss a log or two into the chatter. One of the boys finally asked him what was on his mind. Cap is a police chief, and he said there'd been a big prison break in his county. Some notorious felons had escaped, bad men, and he didn't have a clue as to how they'd gotten out or where the rascals had gone. Worst of it is, the FBI come in on it, he said, flashing their badges, talking about jurisdiction. The bust-out was bad enough without being asked to step aside for a bunch of tin-horn, snot-nosed college boys. Rec Hardy said, where do they get them snot-noses anyway? Is that a collegiate item or government-issued? Neither, said Hoke Abramowitz. They born with them. You ever hear about biology and destiny? As the acorn becomes the oak, so a snot-nose grows up to be a federale. Heads around the campfire nodded. Cap sighed. I can handle the snot-noses, boys. I got a big supply of hankies. But I just ain't got so much as a whiff when it comes to them jailbirds, which is tough to admit. They just flew the coop, made a clean getaway. I feel like a man who woke up with a pig in his bed. Think of it as bacon, Cap, said Rec. Then it ain't so bad. Chilly Daggett spoke up. They must have left some tracks, Cap, he said. Jailbirds can't fly. They couldn't vanish into thin air. I know they couldn't, Cap said, but I'm telling you they did, just like this here smoke. All of us watched as the smoke streamed lazily up on into the darkness, towards the tops of the trees and onto the moon. "You know, Wiley," Cap said after a moment, "I surely would appreciate it if you could find it in your heart to come over and take a look at the scene for me. I confess I'm as lost as a hound dog pup in the Sahara. Never know what that old snoot of yours might turn up." I didn't fancy anybody calling my snoot old, but I said, "If you can find it in your budget, Cap, I expect I can find it in my heart. Because he's an old friend, darn near as old as my snoot, that's how far back we go, and that's how I come to be at the Huron Springs Maximum Security Prison over by Millersburg. I don't expect you'd be familiar with the place. I wasn't. It's not what I'd call a resort hotel, and calabooses are about the last place on earth you'd expect to find this bird. I have what you might call a pronounced affection for the wide open spaces. No roof over my head, no fences or walls. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, and that something would be me, all right. The thought of bars and locks put my teeth on edge, even for a professional visit. But as I have said, Cap is an old friend, and that stands for something. As we waited outside the gates, I said to him, "You sure you want to go through with this, Cap? You're going to owe me big time." "You're my last shot, Wiley," he said. "Let's take it then," I said, and we walked inside. The sound of that steel clanging shut behind me sent a shiver up my spine. I had read about the break, 4 escapees, all of them members of the infamous Sharps Brothers gang, that had stolen $42 million in junk bonds from a savings and loan shortly before it collapsed. I find it truly disturbing when criminals stoop that low. Cap cleared me with the warden and took me to a cluster of cells, the former residences of the escapees. There wasn't much to look at, just cold steel and solid stone. I was wondering if even I could find a clue in here, so far out of my element. "Wait till you see this, Wiley," Cap told me, and he led me into one of the cells. "This is some of the finest blasted representational work I've ever seen in my life. You can't really blame the guards. They didn't know anyone was missing till morning roll." Inside the cell, I could see he was talking about the dummy lying on the bed. I say dummy, but the word don't begin to do it justice. The body under the sheet and blanket was plain stuffing, but the head was a masterpiece. So lifelike I nearly had to touch it to convince myself it wasn't real. And even then I wasn't absolutely sure. I got down on my haunches and went eyeball to eyeball with it, and if it hadn't not been breathing, I'd have swore it was a man. "Soap," Cap said. "Soap melted into a ball, then carved and painted. I tell you, Wiley, I've been to Madame Tussaud's in London, and she hasn't got anything the likes of this. And it's the same story in each cell, the 5 of them." "5?" I said. "I thought there were 4 of them in the gang." "That's right, there were," said Cap, "and they all escaped, plus 1 other. "Take me to his bunk," I said, and even as I said it, I had a certain feeling that I knew who I'd find, or at least his likeness. We were about to walk out and examine the adjoining cell when a man in civilian clothes stepped up and blocked our way. I could see that he was a hard character. He squinted his eyes like he was staring into the sun. That, or his feet were hurting him. Since there was no sun where we were, I knew it had to be his shoes. "What's going on here, Chief?" he said. He spoke through clenched teeth. His feet had to be killing him. He pulled out a handkerchief and blew his nose, a dead giveaway. "FBI. Then he nodded at me. "Who's this?" "Wiley Jessup. He's a friend of mine," Cap said. "I asked him to come in as a personal favor. This is Haggerty, FBI, Wiley." That explained the squint, too. It was his feet, all right. It's those daggone shoes they make 'em wear. Poor bastards. As it does with everything, it's specialty, you might say. The government takes these boys and turns them upside down. Their noses run and their feet smell. "Special Agent Haggerty," he said. "They all think they're special. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know." I put out my hand to shake, but Special Agent Haggerty ignored it. "Is this your jurisdiction, Jessup?" he said. Good Lord, coming at me straight away with the jurisdiction. "This is strictly unofficial," I said. "I told you," Cap tried to tell him. Special Agent Haggerty cut him off. People with feet that are hurting them can be awful impatient. Plus he thinks he's special. A double whammy. "Jurisdiction, Jessup," he repeated. "Mostly forests, mountains, rivers, lakes, and streams," I said. "The great outdoors. What brings you here?" I shrugged. "Friendship." To Cap, Special Agent Haggerty said, "I don't like wise guys, Chief. See that he doesn't interfere with the investigation. Now that you mention it, how is your investigation going? I said. Proceeding apace, Special Agent Haggerty said. He blew his nose again. You show him the dummies, he said to Cap. Seen 'em all, I said, looking right at him. But like Sanderson, he didn't get it. I didn't expect he would. What about that fifth man? I asked him. What about him? Special Agent Haggerty said. Bank robber. Mean anything to you? Yeah, it means they got 5 in the gang now. You've done the math, then, I said. He stared at me. I made a mental note to send him a pair of fleece-lined moccasins and some antihistamine. We're dealing with a pro here, Jessup, he said. We've taken photographs and we're showing them to artists, sculptors, dealers, and gallery owners. Somebody's going to recognize this work, mark my words. He was right about that. Somebody already had. They're marked, I said. He gave me another long, harsh squint, then spun on his heels and walked away. Every step had to be painful. Come on, Cap said. I'll show you the escape route. Never mind, Cap, I said. I know who did this, and I'll bet you a fresh venison steak smothered in grilled onions and wild mushrooms that I know where we can find him. Cap shook his head and grinned. Seeing how it's you, Wiley, I'm not surprised, he said. But you've got to tell me how. My old snoot, I said. That's all it is. My dry old snoot. Come on, Wiley, said Cap. Haggerty's not far off, I said. He's just in the wrong market. I could have checked the prison rolls for all the convicts who'd entered after the Sharps brothers, but there was no real need. I knew he'd be in there, probably under an assumed name. I did take the time to look at the dummy in the next cell, and there he was, the very spitting image. Only one man I knew could do work like that. There's a small cabin way up north past the Calder Mountains, tucked in on an inlet of a lake known as Bird's Foot, which is what the Indians called it on account of its shape. It's a wonderful spot for fishing, and in season, it's a paradise for duck hunters. There's more ducks than you can shake a 20-gauge at, and just enough duck hunters to make for good poker hands after the sun goes down. I used to go there regularly years ago to deprive those duck hunters of their cash, which they didn't need up there, and had too much of anyway. And that's where I met Brady McCoy, the finest decoy carver ever to set foot on this landmass. A McCoy decoy was not only a work of art, it was good enough to fool a duck. Brady could whittle him quick if you wanted to use him in the field for hunting, turn out 1 an hour, just him and his blade and a decent chunk of jellytongue or basswood. But if you wanted a piece for show, for the den or office, then Brady would take a touch longer, like about a week or so, but it was worth the wait. Brady studied every animal he carved, the way it moved and acted and looked in different shades of light, and he had sketchbooks that looked like they belonged to Da Vinci or Audubon, filled with drawings of wings, limbs, feathers, claws, and fur. By the time he turned his hands to the wood, he could make a duck look so lifelike and realistic that you'd swear it was either frozen or the work of the finest taxidermist in the world. He was a regular Pygmalion with wood. Brady told me once with a chuckle that he'd never run out of work because half the ducks he carved got shot in the field by hunters, mistaking them for the real thing. Yes, sir, Brady McCoy was a miracle worker, and it was a pleasure just to watch him carve. He'd work at night while the rest of us played cards, and he hardly ever looked at the piece he was carving on. He did it all by touch, he did, like he was blind, whistling away as he made the chips fly. Yes, sir, it was a remarkable sight to see, one I never forgot. And when I saw those soap-head dummies in the prison, I had no doubt that was the work of Brady McCoy. And the fifth dummy, yes, sir, was a dead ringer for the man himself. It was out of season at Bird's Foot Lake. There wasn't a soul around except for old Brady. He was whittling as usual, whittling and whistling and mighty surprised to see us. I hated to do this to him. It's a shame to cage anything, much less a great artist like Brady. But he'd done wrong, and I was sure he'd find a comfy stool in one of the prison workshops. Of course, license plates, even with the vanities, aren't nearly as satisfying to work on as ducks. After we got through with the hellos, the howdy-doos, and the how-you-bens, I said, Brady, I'm not so much interested in how you all got out as I am in how the Sharps brothers convinced you to go in there in the first place. He shook his head when I said that. He was too old to run, and he had too much respect for his carving tool to use it on anything but wood. Shoot, Wiley, he said. Can't say I'm glad to see you. I was kind of hoping you wouldn't get involved in this. Why'd you do it, Brady, I said. Needed the money, he said. Needed it bad. The market for decoys drying up. It's funny, stuff I carved years ago is worth a fortune now, but I can't find any takers for my new work. You could have got an honest job, I said. You're a fine one to talk, he said. I don't see you in no paper hat. Nah, I couldn't do that. It just ain't me. This is all I can do. How'd they find you, Cap said. This lawyer fella come up. Said they'd pay me an awful lot of money if I'd pretend to rob a bank so I could get thrown in jail and help those boys bust out. I didn't want to do it, but dang it, they offered me too much. Not near enough, I said. He laughed at that. I'm awful disappointed to see you, Wiley. Guess this means now I'll be going to jail for good. I'm afraid so, Brady, I said, but I'll try and pull a string or two and see if I can fix it so you stay in a place I know of that's directly in the path of waterfowl migration. They got a mighty nice workshop there, too. He shook his head. It's more'n I deserve, he said. I'm mighty appreciative. If you could tell us where they went to, Brady, Cap said, the Sharps brothers, it might be helpful to you. I wish I knew, he said, because if I did, they'd be picking buckshot out of their nasty hides right now. They never paid me one dime of what they owed. We got out and they split, left me empty-handed. Cheats is cheats, I said. And stupid is stupid, Brady said. The thought of all that money just blinded me. I'd tell you if I knew. I'd be happy to give 'em up, but I just don't know. That's all right, I said. From what I hear, they're not long on brains themselves, and stealing's all they know. It's a safe bet they'll be back inside before you are. I wasn't too far wrong. A week later, one of the Sharps brothers was apprehended while trying to steal candy from a baby, which shows you what a mean, low-down bunch they were. The kid squealed to its mother, and the bad guys were caught holding the Tootsie Pops. I got the news just as I was sitting down to a fresh venison steak dinner, cooked medium rare, smothered in grilled onions and wild mushrooms, with a beautifully reduced hunter sauce, courtesy of my good friend Cap Robinson, a police chief who can cook as well as he can shoot, and a man who always squares his bets. The baby, he told me, was really Special Agent Haggerty, disguised for undercover work, a decoy, I guess you could say. A fellow special agent was playing his mother. They had information that one of the Sharps brothers had a notorious sweet tooth, and it turned out it was so, and he took the bait. Cheats is cheats, like I said. And maybe Hoke was right, and snot-nosed kids are born that way, too. But how those thieves could have ever mistaken Haggerty for a baby with that squint, well, I guess that shows you what plumb dumb ducks they really were.